Good afternoon, everyone. We are now in Exodus chapter 19. Remember, when they first left Egypt, they left Egypt on the first month, and it was on the 15th of the month. In that first month, there is usually 30 days. And so 15th to the 30th, you get 16 days. What happened is that when we came to Exodus chapter 16, after they've crossed the Red Sea, they came to Elim. And after Elim, they pulled out and they had problems with food. And that was when God gave them manna. And that would be in the second month. In that second month, they were there on the 15th as well. Now, all of these are things that we need to just bear in mind because we're just looking at how things are on the 15th of the month. And the second month has 29 days. That would be another, well, I guess for the entire month, you have 29 days. Then come the third month. Chapter 19 begins in the third month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. And then we have this peculiar phrase, on the same day. They came to the wilderness of Sinai, or the end of the wilderness of Sinai. And on the same day would be the first. Now, one of the things that you find is that so far they would have traversed some 46 days by this time. A total of 46 days. One of the things that some of these calculations try to allude to is that by the time it came to Shavuot or the Pentecost, which would be 49 plus 1 days, which would be a few more days from here, then you find that God would have started to give them the law. And that is how the Hebrew people envisioned this entire episode to leave Egypt here and then to receive the law by the 50th day, right? By the 50th day. So what happens is that they need to have another 3 more days plus the next day. And that would also give us a time of Shavuot. But at this point in time, we only have Pesach, which is the 14th of the month to slaughter the animal, and the 15th to eat it. And then in the next morning, they left Egypt. So now we are at Mount Sinai. So let's continue in verse 2. They had left Rephidim. Now remember, last week, Rephidim was when they had the war with the Amalekites. It was also at a place where they demanded for water. And Moses had went over to Sinai and struck a rock there. And I had suggested that a rock gave out streams of water that flow all the way to Rephidim. Now, on the third month, on that same day, which is the first of the month, they came to the edge of the Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim and had come to the edge of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. This is not a proper place of encampment. So far, they have come to Marah, to Elim, to Rephidim. All of these places are not particularly comfortable. And so they had a lot of complaints and murmur. And so they camped there before the mountain. What that basically entails is they came all the way to Mount Sinai. And on Mount Sinai, they camped before the mountain. Now, if we talk about before the mountain, I would suggest that it's probably right here. Right? Let's say it's here. They're all here, looking at Mount Sinai. In verse 3, and Moses went up to God. So what happened is we have Moses and Moses alone. And it said he went up the mountain to God, or towards God. And it's always an Eastern Oriental thinking that the gods are always on top of mountains. And so he went there, and then you find these phrases. And Jehovah called to him from the mountain. So as he went up, God called to him and says, this is what you should say to the house of Yaakov, Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Now, immediately, I think by now you should be able to tell an A and a B. The house of Jacob is actually the children of Israel. It goes on to say, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. This is all very visible. Notice that when God reveals himself to Israel and all the things that were done to the Egyptians, they were all done in public. There is no private matter that God always referred to. God always referred to things that is publicly visible. It says, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, these are very interesting expressions. Bore you on eagle's wings is to bring you very swiftly, because there are so many of them, and brought you to myself. Now, this is a peculiar passage. You should understand that God is here and it's been waiting for the Israelites to exit Egypt and come all the way to Sinai. So Sinai is the mountain of God. That's why it's always called that. Sinai or Horeb. It is a mountain of God. And God is referring to the fact that he has been waiting for you here. Now, therefore, if you, now notice all of these are conditional. If you indeed obey my voice, is to hear my voice or hear the sound of my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Now think of it this way. See, you shall be a special treasure. The idea of a special treasure is a very peculiar word. This is a valued property, right? A valued property. And this is spoken to the Israelites, that they shall be a valued property to Jehovah, and the value of the property is above all the people of the land. For all of the land is mine. Now you can read this as land. Now the English is always translating as earth, but I think it is very much described to them that they are about to enter the promised land, and God wants to give the land to this people because God cherishes and values Israel above all the people of the land. And so the people of the land will be ejected, and Israel will come and replace them because all the land is mine. Remember, God's land, God's rules. The land that God is about to give to Israel belongs to God. And God continues to describe this. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, better read as ministers, that they will be the one who would serve me, and a holy nation. And that would be a special nation. That would be a unique nation. Unique nation, special nation, just like God is a holy God. It's different from all other nations. And God reminds Moses, these are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now, this is quite interesting because the next two verses, 7 and 8, is, I guess, might be said to be different. That is out of place, but I guess to some of the key sages and commentators, this should be a continuation of verse 6 and not an out of place or out of chronology event. We shall take it as a chronological event that chapter 19, verse 7 follows verse 6. And this word so is and then. After Moses came down, Moses came and called for the elders of the people. The elders represent the people and laid before them. Now, interestingly, this would be put to their face. Put this to their faces. So basically, it's to show them what God had commanded him. And then the response is then, this would be, and then after it's been presented, all the people answered together and said, all the Lord has spoken, we will do. After that, Moses brought back the words of the people to God in Jehovah, and Jehovah said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So let us break this down a little bit. After it was positioned to them that they must obey and hear God's voice and keep and guard his covenant, then God will make them a valued property. God will cherish them. God will protect them. And God will give them the best of the land. And then they all said, yes, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. If we take it in a chronological fashion, that way Moses went up, and then Moses came down, and then Moses went up again. So you can now see it this way. One, Moses went up, and then two, Moses came down, and then three, Moses went back up again. Now, understand that at this point in time, they haven't seen the presence of God. Moses just went up, and there was nothing spectacular for them to see. But Moses came back, says, I met God, and this is what God says. So very much so, it is to outline to Israel, now that you're here at Mount Sinai, then you must obey my voice, keep my commandment, that all of this will be true. That God wants to give the land to them above all the people. The people will not get to enjoy the land Israel gets to enjoy the land. And your function would be to serve me, a kingdom of ministers or priests. And you will be a special nation because by keeping my covenant, everyone will see that you are special and unique. Now, all of this is to confirm that Israel says yes, but they haven't seen God yet. And so God says here, I will come to you in the thick cloud. Now, we've talked about this before. The presence of God is seen in thick clouds, right? The presence of God. When it says thick clouds, it will also be dark clouds because you can't see any light. Very thick. This is very important. God doesn't show himself in light. God shows himself through darkness to show that it is the Shekinah of God is so marvelous that it will blind and kill those who see God. So nobody can see the face of God and live. And so God's intention is for them to hear. They know that God is there, that they can hear the voice of God, and then they would believe you. Now, this is important. This word in verse 9 that says that they will then believe is to be firm, to have confidence in you forever or for olam. Why? Because God has shown publicly. That's why they can hear publicly that it is with Moses that God is communicating with. And so all of this is a show of strength, a show of power, without actually revealing God's face. And so Moses went up, and the next thing happened in verse 10. And so Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. He is now up again. Then the Lord said to Moses, verse 10, says, go to the people, and this word consecrate. The idea of consecrate is to make them holy, right? Make holy. Right? I'll explain it shortly. Make them holy today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. Every time you see the word wash, we are talking about immersion. The river that flowed from Sinai to Rephidim should still be around. Big, big river. And let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. This is going to be a public display. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up the mountain or touch its base. So more importantly is don't come near. This is out of bounds. So whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Very serious. Nor a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast, he shall not live. There is no way that you can touch. Now it says touch him would be touch the mountain. All right? Touch the mountain. The mountain is masculine. This is masculine. And so shall not touch him will be touch the mountain. So put to death will be stoned or shot with an arrow. And whether man or beast shall not live. So what have we seen? We have an A and a B. Don't touch the mountain. Don't touch him. So we're talking about the same thing. Next, When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. So what's going to happen is this. The people are told to be far away. Stay far away. And when there's a sound of the shofar, just approach nearer, but don't cross the border. So now we have this statement. Verse 14. And then Moses went down from the mountain to the people. And this would be number 4. And set apart the people, and they washed their clothes. So make holy is to set apart, that they are to do something very special that they have never done before. That is what sanctify mean. Wash their clothes, immerse their clothes, clean themselves. They've been walking in the wilderness for many, many days now, and they have to clean themselves and put themselves apart, be different, be unique. And what else is there? Said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not come any of your wives. So this idea is no intimacy. Intimacy is considered unclean. And so be ready for the third day. So what we have now is another few days. So what we have here is that let them be ready today, tomorrow, and then the third day, God will come down. And so we have the first is today, and then we have the second, and then we have the third. If you add 3 more, we're now in the 49th day. And that will be very, very close to the 7 Sabbaths of the Shavuot. So what essentially I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to mirror this to show you that it is pacing the Shavuot. Because on the next day would be chapter 20, right? And that would be the 50th day, and the 10 commandments are given. So now we have this readiness to make holy, that they keep themselves pure, they set themselves apart, they wash their clothes, they keep clean, and there is no intimacy, because all of this will make them unclean for this purpose. So the idea is to be ready for the third day. Verse 16. Now in verse 16, it came to pass, and then it came to pass on the third day, and the third day would really be this day here. That would be the 49th day. On the third day, in the morning, there were thunderings and lightning. So you need to close your eyes and imagine the scenario. They're all standing here at the base of Mount Sinai, and suddenly they heard thunder and lightning and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the shofar was very loud. This word trumpet in verse 16 essentially is the shofar. And so you hear shofar, and that's a signal. The shofar blowing is not arbitrary. In the days of Israel, they are used for very specific, what we call indicators. And just like most armies, they would have a trumpet call, bugle call, and the style of the bugle call will determine what needs to be done. And so the Israelites will actually blow the shofar as an indicator. And so we have thunder, lightning, thick clouds. So we can represent it here this way. We have thick clouds. And the thick clouds is important because they are thick and you can't see anything through. You can actually see lightning. right? You can actually read this recollection in Deuteronomy chapter 4. And Moses was recounting then. But this is the specific event that Moses in Deuteronomy 4 is recounting. So Moses is saying that all the people who were in the camp tremble. Now, this idea of tremble here would be shuddering in terror. Shudder in terror. Basically, they were terrified. Why? Because they've never ever seen the presence of God. So remember, the thick clouds or dark clouds represents the presence of God. Then you can hear the thunder, you can see the lightning, and it is scary. So think of it this way: it's an extremely scary sight. Now, Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God. And this is even more scary. Meet with God. Stood at the foot of the mountain. They've been warned, don't cross the line. Then it says here, now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. So to enhance the picture, you can now see that it is all covered in smoke. Right? All covered in smoke. Now you can't see Mount Sinai anymore, but you can actually see the fire coming from heaven. All the lightning. I don't think this is just fire that is a normal fire, but this is fire like lightning. And it's bright, very, very bright. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, which means that it is even greater than what we are seeing now. It is rising up. As it's rising up, it is an incredible sight. Really an incredible sight. The whole mountain shook and trembled. And the blast of the shofar sounded long, became louder and louder. What does that mean? It means that this is an indication of something that is going to happen. Now, this idea is a very musical term. The shofar sounded long, so the blowing is long. It became louder and louder. Now, in music, it's called a crescendo, meaning it starts with not very loud sound and it gets louder and louder and louder. And this is what it means. And always, whenever it's a crescendo, it is to direct your attention to what came after the loud sounds. So we now have, and Moses spoke, and God answered him by sound. And then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses on the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. This is number 5. So Moses went up in the darkness. Next, and the Lord said to Moses, now they're talking again. Says, go down and warn the people lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. God's mountain, God's rules, God's presence, God's rules. It's really very much like a king, isn't it? When you go and meet with a king, you have to follow the protocol of the king. And here they are meeting God, and so they have to follow the protocol of God. Also, let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. Now, this is important because God wants to make sure that his rules are kept. Nobody comes up to the mountain, not even cross the base. Now, these are rules that if they violate the rules, then they will die. It is that strict. In the old days, when you've got emperors and kings and whatnot, they have absolute powers. And so when you violate any of their rules, however small they may be, now according to their fancies, they can actually execute anyone that they don't like who violate this. It is that serious. So, like Queen Esther cannot just go up to the king. Nobody can come up to God unless God calls him. Verse 23, in our final segment, but Moses said to God, "Don't worry. He has given strict instructions. The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying." Now, understand this in verse 23. The idea here of warn is a very interesting word. It is to solemnly exhort. We don't normally talk about it this way. It is to solemnly exhort, solemnly charge, which means this is not a flippant request. This is translated as warning, but basically it's a charge that is given through Moses to the people that they are not to touch lest they will be executed. And so he tells God, "You have told us this, and we have set bounds around the mountain and consecrated it." Remember, consecrated here literally means to make holy. How can you make the mountain holy? Well, you surround it by not allowing anyone to come out. That's why it is special. Next, verse 24, and the Lord said to him, "Away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them." And so Moses went down to the people to speak to them. This is number 6. God has indicated that Moses is a very persistent and strong individual. Just in chapter 19 alone, he's gone up and come down altogether 3 times up, 3 times down. And at the end of chapter 19, it is down and he went to speak to the people. Now, all of this is to show a public witness that all of them heard God speak to Moses. They all saw the presence of God. They all heard the shofar blowing. They all heard the thunder. They all saw the lightning. They saw something so spectacular, and then they heard God speak to Moses. These are all what we call public display. In the public display, the people then got very scared, and they are supposed to tell their children and the children's children that God spoke to them. They saw God, at least in the clouds, and they are very afraid. And Moses spoke to God, and they all saw that and heard that, and they now can have confidence that when Moses speaks to them, that this is what Jehovah says, they all will listen. And so this is a public display. Nobody to go up, nobody to touch, and everybody watch, listen, be a witness, and tell the rest of the generations. This public display is a one and only time. We're down here in number 49. And Moses came down, right? Moses came down to speak to them in number 49. Now, what is interesting by way of preparing you for the next chapter, is that God spoke again without us knowing that Moses went up again. So there is a lot of assumptions. If we take this in a chronological fashion, then you will realize that now in verse 25, this is the 49th day. And when it gets to chapter 20, that becomes the 50th day. There is no significance right now because they weren't given this new feast called Shavuot. And when they are given this feast called Shavuot, then they would realize that this is the very day the 10 commandments or the 10 statements and the entire law and covenant was made. Now, all of this is important for us to realize that dates are important. We have Pesach, and now we have the beginnings of the semblance of Shavuot. Certainly, they are to commemorate the feast of first fruits and they are giving it to God. All of that is part and parcel of life in the land. But the significance, even greater, would be the giving of the law and the giving of the covenant to the nation of Israel. And so, with this, we come to the end of our session today. Just a quick addendum to show you how we may be able to calculate the number of days from Egypt to Sinai. Remember, in Exodus chapter 12, on the 14th day of the first month, you have the sacrifices prepared, eaten on the 15th day, and that's the Pesach, the Passover of God, struck down the firstborn of the Egyptians. On that very day, or the morning part, they left Egypt. Now, from there on, they had been able to traverse the wilderness, cross the Red Sea, and then did all these things. And by the time they left Elim, that would be in Exodus chapter 16, verse 1, and that would be the 15th day of the second month. So, all in all, in the first month, there will be approximately 16 days, and the second month would be approximately 29 days. That's how the number of days in the Hebrew calendar works, alternating 30 and 29 days. Now, in chapter 19 of Exodus, verse 1, they arrive at Sinai on the first of the month. Now, if we read it carefully, we might be able to find the first ascent to Mount Sinai in Exodus 19, verses 3 to 7, as the next day. And then he came back down, and then the next day he went back up again, which would be on the third. And he came back to set them apart for today, tomorrow, and then on the third day, which would be the fifth day, he went back up. Now, that would be the third day of the setting apart, which essentially tells us that before the end of chapter 19, they were there to see the public display of God. And they actually saw that, and there would be the giving of the 10 commandments, and also part of the giving of the law and the covenants. Now, there is a number of chronological issues because the summary of the laws are put together, but not inserted at the places of the chronology. However, for our purposes, you would find that we have 16, 29, which makes 45, and another 5 days here by the time God gave the public display of the 10 commandments. 5 days, a total of 50 days. That's how we may arrive at the Shavuot, which is 7 Sabbaths and the day after the Sabbath. Now, I'm just alluding this to the Shavuot because by this time, the Shavuot is not told yet until the giving of the law from the 5th day onwards. And so with this, we should have just a fair idea, not exactly a rocket science, but to give us a fair idea of the number of days by the time we get to chapter 20, approximately 50 days.